Game engines serve more or less as the skeletal structure of a game's programming. They are a framework that can be carried and modified from game to game, generation to generation, offering a veritable suite of components and tools. They help facilitate a simplified and faster development pipeline for a team that's already familiar with the software. At least, that's what they're supposed to do. Not every engine serves every project with equal efficiency. Sometimes they hurt more than they help. Broadening an engine's capabilities for supporting mechanics and systems for different genres may require an extensive amount of work. But in the ideal scenario, the engine is already open-ended enough that such a task can be done with relative ease. In the early days of gaming, engines didn't really exist, and individual games were all programmed from the ground up as singular entities, taking advantage of their targeted hardware in varying ways. This meant a pitifully small amount of code could be reused from one game to the next, and the rest had to be tossed out. But thankfully, that frustrating era of development didn't last terribly long, as engines started to pop up as soon as the early 80s. A prominent example would be the framework for Nintendo's Excitebike being reused for Super Mario Bros., which allowed Mario's movement to smoothly accelerate from a walk to a run. Third-party engines weren't really a thing until the mid-90s and the emergence of 3D graphics. The term game engine didn't really exist either until it became commonly associated with first-person shooters like Doom and Quake. The 1998 release of Unreal is quite possibly the most important singular moment in the last 30 years of video game history, due to the mere existence of the Unreal Engine and how it has grown to be relied upon by countless studios since. Another interesting thing about engines is how they are modified. Different studios can get their hands on the same engine, but if they're allowed to make changes to it, they could end up being very different, creating an extensive family tree that spans many years and franchises. The Wikipedia page for Game Engine has a great example in the form of the Quake engine and how it changed over time to become both the id Tech family as well as the Source engine, commonly associated with Valve. I've almost always been aware of game engines, but it wasn't until about 8 years ago that I really started thinking about their importance and how they might contribute to the development process by making things easier, or, in unfortunate cases, harder too. In the last few years, I've seen a lot of discussion about a lot of various engines, both proprietary and freely available. I've also been seeing a lot of my favorite developers and publishers move from older engines they commonly used in the mid-2000s to mid-2010s to new engines, oftentimes creations of their own. For example, Ryuga Gotoku Studio, the developers behind the Yakuza franchise, moving over to their shiny new Dragon engine starting with the release of Yakuza 6. Or Square Enix moving over from Crystal Tools, which they used for Final Fantasy XIII and XIV, to a combination of both Luminous Engine, which is also their own creation, and Unreal Engine 4, which is not. But for this video, I want to single out and discuss 3 specific engines in particular, all proprietary: EA's Frostbite, Capcom's RE engine, and the King of the Hill, Epic's Unreal. The reason why I want to touch on these 3 varies a bit between them, but generally speaking, I found myself thinking about them the most recently, and I think it'd be more organized for me to just discuss them all in one video dedicated to the subject of engines. First, let's start off with Frostbite, which belongs to EA. The 1.0 version of the engine debuted with Battlefield Bad Company in 2008, and it was designed to allow real-time destruction of high-quality environmental assets working in tandem with destruction-based audio that played at differing sound levels depending on the amount of destruction happening around the player. Due to it being an early version of the engine, it was still a work in progress, but its features still managed to stand out pretty well. 3 years after that, version 2.0 was introduced with Battlefield 3. Improvements to the destruction system included the ability for falling debris to potentially damage players, as well as various gameplay mechanics, like suppressive fire, and disabling vehicles instead of outright destroying them. In 2013, Frostbite 3.0 debuted with Battlefield 4, featuring an even more robust destruction system, demonstrated by the dam in the map Lankang Dam being destroyed by player activity, and subsequently altering the map itself. Similarly, the skyscraper in the middle of the Siege of Shanghai map can be taken down, turning it into a pile of rubble in the middle of the match too. As the years would go on, Frostbite would see more and more improvements to its systems, and graphical and audio capabilities as well. For all intents and purposes, it is a great engine for the Battlefield franchise, and has served it really well for the past 14 years they've been tied together. However, the problem with Frostbite has less to do with its association with Battlefield and more on EA's passionate insistence that many of their studios also use this engine, regardless of the genre of the game they're trying to make. The first non-first-person shooter to have Frostbite forced upon it was Need for Speed: The Run, which released in 2011. According to developers at EA Black Box, it took a whole year of the game's development time to simply repurpose Frostbite to support driving and racing over shooting. Granted, once that work was over, it made things significantly easier. But still, that's a whole year spent on simply getting the game engine you're forced to work with in a state that can actually facilitate that work. And it doesn't end there. Frostbite has proven to be a pain in the ass for BioWare on multiple occasions, and for DICE themselves during the development of Battlefield 2042. For the former's case, BioWare employees have gone on record to state their issues with the engine's complexity, causing the development of Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect Andromeda, and Anthem to all be more frustrating than necessary. Frostbite wasn't really suited to handle the full scope of a huge RPG like Dragon Age or Mass Effect, so BioWare had to spend a lot of precious time and manpower in creating those RPG systems themselves, just so the development of the actual game can get off the ground. And for Battlefield 2042, the biggest problem comes from DICE allegedly having only 15 months to develop the game, and many of the senior staff that were the most familiar with the engine having already left the studio since the release of the significantly more praised Battlefield 1. It just goes to show that Frostbite is a good engine, but only after you put the incredible amount of work in to modifying it so that it actually has the tools you need to make the genre of game you're trying to make. This is why I wanted to discuss Frostbite so badly. It's the prime example of how an engine can be good, but it doesn't mean it's good for everything. EA desperately wants all of its studios to use Frostbite, because I'm pretty confident that management absolutely despises the idea of paying licensing fees to other companies for their engines, however easier they may be to use. Basically, Frostbite is like high-quality metal, but EA wants to use this metal to make mattresses. They're trying to force their developers to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it eats up valuable development time, casting a shadow on the engine's reputation even though it seems to be a very solid piece of software once you get it going. This leads me into the second engine I wish to touch on, Capcom's RE engine. Much like EA with Frostbite, Capcom seems to have the ambitious goal of having all their big franchises running on RE Engine. But, unlike Frostbite, RE Engine actually seems to be doing a stellar job, no matter how many genres are thrown at it. Reach for the Moon Engine, shortened to RE Engine, which is an annoying way of shortening that, but what can you do, was first developed in 2014, alongside the development of Resident Evil 7. Both the game and the engine were made in tandem with the specific purpose of the engine making development of the game easier, and thus, the engine was created with RE7's linearity in mind. For the previous decade, Capcom had been using their MT framework engine, which had grown too slow for their development pipeline. According to Jun Takeuchi, the head of Capcom's Dev 1 team, To create that level of quality, conventional production methods would take too long and cost too much. Thus, we had to rethink the way we make games. In order to carry out asset-based development, which is globally the mainstream, we began developing our new RE engine. RE Engine debuted alongside its partner project, Resident Evil 7, in 2017 to a lot of well-deserved praise. Not only was RE7 an excellent game in its own right, it was also the perfect showcase for the engine to flex its muscles regarding its high-quality assets. Ever since then, the RE engine has proven itself time and again to be a very capable piece of technology. It was used once more in the remake of Resident Evil 2, but the more drastic and impressive utilization was for Devil May Cry 5, which is not a slow, first-person horror game. In fact, it's a very fast, third-person character action game that focuses a lot on spectacle. If RE Engine were any less capable, this is probably where the cracks would have started to form, but they didn't. Turns out, Capcom was able to modify their engine further so that it could handle the likes of crazy, high-time gunslinging and sword-swinging action without breaking a sweat. And it still doesn't stop there. Ghosts 'n Goblins Resurrection was entirely on RE Engine as well, proving that it could also do 2D side-scrolling gameplay with the same amount of finesse. In that same year, Monster Hunter Rise also launched as the first Monhun game on RE Engine, and it also did quite well, to put it lightly. But even still, it doesn't end there. The upcoming Resident Evil 4 remake will be on RE Engine to no one's surprise, but so will Exoprimal, Capcom's upcoming PvPvE multiplayer shooter, and Pragmata, their ambitious new sci-fi IP, and Street Fighter VI, their #1 fighting game franchise, and Dragon's Dogma 2, their big RPG project that'll almost definitely show up its predecessor in terms of scale. RE Engine has a huge slate of games coming up, spread across an impressive amount of genres, but at this point I don't have any fear or dread as to how the engine might complicate things. Capcom has shown that their teams know how to use it and work with it, producing some remarkable results. It seems to be a very reliable and versatile piece of software, and I can see Capcom wanting to stick with it for as long as they possibly can. Because, why wouldn't they? They seem to have struck gold with it. It's as though the engine gets better and better with every new game that's built on it. And having this engine supporting Capcom gives me, a fan, some reassurance on the quality of their upcoming games. And this is how having a sturdy and reliable game engine can also help a company's reputation. Whenever a game from EA built on Frostbite is announced that isn't a shooter, there's always going to be some reluctance about it. But when a game from Capcom built on RE Engine is shown off to the world, the last thing anyone is thinking about is development woes caused by an unruly or poorly equipped framework, and that is a reputation the engine has earned. And honestly, if Capcom is willing to do it, I wouldn't be surprised if they licensed it out to other companies. To my knowledge, they never did that with MT Framework, but if RE Engine continues its upward trend of gradual improvements and wider genre support, I imagine some third-party studios who haven't settled on a regular engine themselves might want to take a crack at it. But at the end of the day, it's all up to them. And finally, I want to discuss the third engine this video is focused on. The king of the hill, the big boss of all engines as far as the market is concerned, Unreal. Now, I won't go into detail about the history of Unreal Engine because honestly there's enough there for its own video, but I do stick by what I said earlier, that the release of the game Unreal is one of the most important moments in gaming history, simply because it introduced the Unreal Engine to the world. Some of you might consider that a bit of an embellishment, but my reasoning is pretty simple. Look up the list of games running on Unreal Engine and count how many big-name franchises and developers you can find, especially within the last 10 years. There's blockbusters like Days Gone, Returnal, Valorant, State of Decay, Borderlands, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, XCOM, Lost Ark, Hellblade, Mortal Kombat, BioShock Infinite, Payday, and the upcoming Suicide Squad game. There's a ton of other fighting games like King of Fighters, Samurai Showdown, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Guilty Gear. There's a lot of Square Enix properties, including Final Fantasy VII Remake and Kingdom Hearts 3, and other JRPGs from different studios like Scarlet Nexus, Tales of Arise, Shin Megami Tensei 5. There's a metric fuck ton of different AA games or popular indie games. It Takes Two, Life is Strange, Splitgate, The Dark Pictures Anthology, Assetto Corsa Competizione, Ace Combat 7, and way more. This is seriously just the tip of the iceberg. If you haven't done it before, I recommend skimming the entire list because I guarantee you will find at least one game that'll surprise you. All of this begs the question, why are these companies moving to Unreal? Especially the big ones who could absolutely afford the research and development needed to make their own proprietary engine. Well, there's several factors, and all of them contribute to the fact that Unreal is just worth using. I am not a game developer by any stretch of the imagination, and my programming experience is pretty much limited to just customizing MySpace pages about 20 years ago. But back in late 2020, even I was able to download the software and make a small, just functional enough first-person shooter level over a single day by just working along with YouTube tutorial videos. What I'm trying to say is, Unreal Engine is stupidly easy to use, and in all the important ways. There's countless learning tools and resources for it available online for the low cost of completely free. And its technological capabilities are astounding. Ray tracing, advanced physics, high-quality textures, and assets made by photogrammetry, Unreal Engine has it all, and it takes no time in learning how to use it. If a total greenhorn like me can make a functional level in an afternoon, then of course a team of experienced professionals could pump out something truly astounding without breaking a sweat. Unreal excels at a variety of genres and projects, from first-person shooters to RPGs to simulators to 2D side-scrollers, and it's very good at scaling these projects for whatever platform you're releasing on. So doing something like hitting a frame rate target for the PlayStation 5 version of the game you're making isn't going to take a year of additional work. Plus, on the business side of things, Unreal Engine makes it easier to hire new staff, because more often than not, Unreal is going to be the first engine someone uses when learning how to develop games. Because, and these are additional big points, Unreal is free to use, and Epic even gives you access to its source code, so you can modify, extend, or integrate it with other software. That's not to say Unreal Engine is totally perfect. There's other engines worth using if you have a very specific vision in mind for your game, such as Godot for indie devs working on small-scale projects. Nor am I saying that every company should use it. RE Engine seems to be doing amazing things for Capcom, as I stated. But whether you're an indie dev with ambition, or a AAA corporation with $200 million to throw around, Unreal Engine could be the engine that works best for you and your team. It has a broad selection of tools and editors, countless free resources and learning material, and it's just reliable, highly versatile, and easy to use. A lot of companies are glad to pay licensing fees for this thing because the pros drastically outweigh the cons. And I've noticed there's a bit of a worry for some people who feel like there's a little too much industry-wide uniformity going on because of how many studios are using Unreal. But honestly, considering how open-ended it is, I'm not really worried about the idea of Unreal games feeling the same, because, well, they don't. I've seen people claim that they do, claim that they can feel that same Unreal ickiness between Unreal games. But I gotta call bullshit on that. You seriously expect me to believe that you get the same feel between Guilty Gear Strive, Jedi Fallen Order, It Takes Two, Life is Strange,
And Assetto Corsa Competizione? Give me a break. How stupid do you think I am? But you could specifically talk about something like input latency on PlayStation consoles for fighting games that are on Unreal, which is an odd but persistent issue that's only recently being addressed. Then you would at least have some sort of tangible problem to talk about.
But yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about game engines, specifically the three that I've been thinking about the most as of late. Frostbite does look like a good piece of software once it's feature complete for the game it's being used for, but it also seems to cause a lot of problems that a more versatile and easier to use engine would avoid. Meanwhile, RE Engine seems to be exactly that, and is proving to be Capcom's greatest asset for the last several years. And then you have Unreal, dominating over the competition with widespread use, and for good reason. Engines are really fascinating, and they all have their uses and purposes, and it's really interesting diving into their strengths and weaknesses. Like I said, I'm not a developer. I'm just a guy who plays the games, not makes them. But it's always cool to hear about how an engine helps or hurts the development process behind the scenes. There really isn't any sort of message or purpose to this video other than the fact that I wanted to talk about some game engines, so there you go. This concludes my video on game engines.
Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.